Let me introduce you. This is the woman I've been living with since you left home to give birth, my husband said with a smile, his arm around the shoulder of the naked woman leaning against him. While I was away at my parents' house for the birth and care of my twins, my husband had moved his mistress into our home. She acted as if she had been living there all along. It's your fault for getting pregnant. You don't do any housework, and you won't even sleep with me. There's no point in continuing this marriage. My husband had insisted that morning sickness wasn't an illness when I was suffering terribly from it. He deeply despised me for becoming a housewife, calling me useless. He intimidated me with his cold attitude, shouting to justify himself. His attitude didn't change even after I gave birth. The newborn babies started crying, startled by his loud voice. I'll divorce you, so take those noisy brats and get out. I pulled my children close and started to leave as I was told. While the situation might seem unreasonable, I had a powerful ally who could turn this around. Once this person's secret was revealed, it would instantly wipe the triumphant look off my husband's face. My powerful ally was my father. Stanley, you're the one who will suffer from this divorce, my father, who had been quiet until now, spoke in a low voice. What are you talking about? This has nothing to do with you. Just leave with Nancy. As my father maintained a solemn atmosphere while staring straight at Stanley, I felt tense. Don't you know anything? Immediately after that, my husband and his mistress would grow pale at the words coming from my father's mouth. My name is Nancy, and I'm 60 years old now. I have twins, a boy and a girl. My son's name is Daniel, and my daughter's name is Jackie. Their father's name is Stanley. I met him during my college years. Stanley had lost his parents early and was paying for his tuition and living expenses with scholarships and part-time jobs. Despite being academically excellent and good-looking, Stanley tried to keep a low profile in college, seemingly uncomfortable with attention from women. I admired how he strived to forge his own path despite his early hardships. I respected Stanley and developed special feelings for him. My persistent approach paid off, and we started dating. Our relationship remained steady even after becoming a couple. Our relationship continued even after Stanley graduated from graduate school and got a job. His employer was a renowned financial company both domestically and internationally. Working as a salesperson at this typically hard-to-enter company, Stanley earned a higher income than his peers and was often envied by others. For Stanley himself, working at a major corporation was probably his greatest pride. However, shortly after starting work, Stanley's personality began to change gradually. Stanley, who had lived quietly trying not to stand out in college, became extravagant with money and his behavior gradually became flashier. I sometimes found Stanley suspicious, thinking maybe it was because he was in sales and couldn't appear cheap. However, at that time, I was blind to his excellence. After that, I graduated from college and got a job as a clerk at a real estate company. 2 years after we both started working as professionals, I discovered I was pregnant. Stanley acknowledged it, and we were soon to be married. I thought I was at the height of happiness. However, not everything was joyful. From about 2 months into the pregnancy, I was hit with severe morning sickness. The morning sickness was so severe I could barely get up, sometimes being bedridden all day, and I frequently missed work. At that time, compared to now, maternity leave systems weren't well established, and many female employees resigned upon marriage or childbirth. I couldn't trouble the company any further. I decided to focus solely on protecting my unborn child. With that in mind, I decided to quit my job and spend the rest of my pregnancy quietly. Stanley didn't seem to think well of this. When Stanley returned from work, he would sigh at the sight of me lying in bed. Slacking off again? The room's a mess, and there's no dinner prepared. You've been like this ever since you got pregnant. I've been throwing up almost all day today. I can't even keep water down, and I'm worried every day about whether the baby is growing properly. Pregnancy isn't an illness, right? I don't approve of you quitting your job. You can't even do basic housework for me when I'm working late into the night. You're useless. But at that time, Stanley deeply despised me for becoming a full-time housewife. He seemed to think morning sickness was just an excuse to slack off on housework. His cold attitude intimidated me, his eyes looking down on me. Those eyes were nothing but terrifying to me, and no matter how difficult my situation was, I had no choice but to obey Stanley. My belly grew increasingly heavy with twins, and my condition didn't improve even after entering the stable period. Despite how much I asked for help, Stanley had no intention of helping with housework. Due to poor health and accumulated stress, I was eventually diagnosed with threatened premature labor. After consulting with my doctor, I decided to return to my parents' home for rest and care. I felt relieved at the thought of being away from Stanley. However, my relief was short-lived as Stanley called my parents' house. It's inappropriate to leave home. Without you, I can't even manage proper meals or laundry. Don't abandon your housework to depend on your parents. Don't be unreasonable. I need to prepare for the birth now. Are you defying me? How dare you act selfishly when I'm supporting you? Don't bother coming back. With that, Stanley hung up. Terrified by Stanley's intimidating attitude, I collapsed where I was, still holding the phone. Why was he always only thinking about himself and never worried about me or the baby? I was confused, wondering where the Stanley I had respected had gone. Nancy, what's wrong? My father, noticing something was wrong, called out to me. He placed his hand on my slumped shoulder and helped me up slowly. My gentle, always kind father. Upon feeling his warmth, I finally couldn't hold back anymore and burst into tears. My father called my mother as well and made time for us to talk, so I explained everything that had happened. The verbal abuse I received from Stanley during pregnancy. If it continued after childbirth, it might harm not only me but also the children. I was scared and living in fear every day. Finally, I confided to my parents that I was considering divorce as a possibility. And I concluded by whispering, "I'm sorry for being an unfilial daughter." My father and mother had been quietly listening to my story, but when I had calmed down, my father began to speak. "If you want to divorce, that's fine. This is your home too, Nancy, so you can always come back. Besides, there's no need to apologize. If anything, we'd prefer words of gratitude. It would make both your mother and me feel better." My father said this with a smile, cutting through the gloomy conversation, while my mother smiled shyly beside him. Their smiles made me feel deeply reassured. I want to show the same love to my children that they showed me. Being their ally and protecting them, it would surely be wonderful to hear them say, "Thank you." For the first time since becoming pregnant, I felt I could be positive. After that, there was no contact from Stanley. Since I didn't return home, I didn't know how Stanley was living, and I didn't have the courage to contact him. Several months later, I gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, slightly earlier than the due date. I named the boy Daniel and the girl Jackie. These were names I had thought of early in my pregnancy, and when I checked with Stanley, he had said, "It's up to you," and showed no interest. So I decided on their names by myself. My parents liked the names too and called their grandchildren's names with affection. My father called Stanley to inform him of the birth, but apparently Stanley declined to visit, saying he was too busy with work. My first experience with childcare, and suddenly with 2 babies. Even now, I think I couldn't have raised these children alone without my parents' help. Even after a month since the birth, Stanley never came to see the children. I had planned to return to the house where Stanley lived after the first month postpartum, and my father had supposedly conveyed this to Stanley. However, Stanley never came to pick us up. With no choice, I rode in my father's car with Daniel and Jackie to return to our home where Stanley was. I was a bit afraid to meet Stanley after so long, but I thought he wouldn't be cold since my father was with me today. And maybe, just maybe, seeing the children would bring out Stanley's paternal side. With such faint hope, I stood at the entrance holding Jackie while my father held Daniel. When I nervously opened the door, there was something I never imagined. Next to Stanley's leather shoes was a pair of high heels. Shoes I would never have worn while pregnant. These shoes weren't mine. I was stunned. The presence of these shoes meant Stanley was now in the house with a woman. Not understanding what was happening, I stumbled into the house. "Wait, Nancy." My father seemed to sense something and tried to stop me from being drawn into the house, but it was too late. When I opened the living room door, Stanley and a young woman, presumably the owner of the high heels, were sitting close together. Their discarded clothes were scattered around them. Nancy. The naked couple before me was surprised by my appearance. Their gesture of hurriedly gathering their clothes to cover themselves was pathetic. To prevent the children from seeing this scene, I covered Jackie's eyes. "Stanley, what's going on? Have you betrayed me and the children?" As I questioned them forcefully, my father slowly approached behind me, still holding Daniel. Stanley and his lover, initially surprised by the sudden event, looked at each other and then, showing no signs of remorse, began laughing as if they had nothing to be ashamed of. "Let me introduce you. This is Harriet, my junior at work. We've been living together here since you went to your parents' house." The woman called Harriet had a cute appearance and looked at me with her beautifully shaped eyes. This was one room in the apartment where Stanley had started living after getting his job. I had moved in after our marriage, but Harriet acted as if she had been living there all along. Despite this being our first meeting, Harriet boldly spoke sarcastically to me. "I'm sorry, but as I listened to Stanley's complaints about how his wife never did anything around the house, we ended up in this relationship. But it's your fault. You abandoned such a wonderful man, using pregnancy as an excuse. I didn't even want to get married yet in the first place. I wanted to aim higher in my career and have more fun. It's your fault for getting pregnant. You got pregnant, then you stopped doing housework and wouldn't even sleep with me. What's the point in continuing such a marriage?" As Stanley angrily confronted me, trying to justify himself, Daniel and Jackie started crying, startled by his loud voice. Stanley irritably covered his ears and glared at us. "Ah, shut up. This is why I hate children. I'll give you a divorce, so take those noisy brats and get out." "That's right. This is our home now." Stanley embraced Harriet's shoulder as she leaned against him, with an expression of contentment. The sight of their love was like a painting, and standing before that painting, I felt tears about to spill from my eyes. "You should be holding your newborn children, not her." Even though I wanted to express my anger, the words wouldn't come out properly. My weakened postpartum mental state and the shocking events before me were dulling my thought processes. I hugged the crying Jackie tightly in my arms and turned my back on Stanley, preparing to leave as I was told. "Dad, let's go." I called out to my father and started heading toward the entrance when it happened. "Wait. Stanley, you're the one who will suffer from this divorce." My father, who had been quiet until now, began speaking in a low voice. It was a tone I could never have imagined from my usually gentle-speaking father. While emanating a solemn atmosphere, he stared straight at Stanley. "What are you talking about? This has nothing to do with you, so please leave with Nancy. You two work at the same company, is that correct?" "That's right. We work at an excellent major corporation. It's a company that an old man like you could never dream of working for." "I see, so it's workplace adultery, that's what this is." My father was questioning Stanley, as if confirming each point one by one. He seemed completely unaffected by Harriet's snide remarks. Perhaps stressed by my father's attitude, Stanley lost his patience. "What's your deal? If you have something to say, just say it clearly. Don't you know anything? I'm glad I brought my business card today." My father entrusted Daniel to me and took out a business card from his chest pocket. Stanley reluctantly accepted the card from my father. When he saw my father's occupation written on it, Stanley's face instantly turned pale. "Legal counsel." "That's right. I serve as legal counsel for several major corporations. Including, of course, your company." "That's a lie." "It's not a lie. Neither the fact that I've been serving your company for many years, nor that I worked behind the scenes to help you get into such a major corporation." "What? What do you mean?" Everyone present was shocked by my father's sudden revelation. When Stanley was job hunting, he had dinner with my family once. At that time, Stanley had apparently shared his dream of working at a certain company with my father. "I had taken a liking to you. Despite being a student, you had big dreams and weren't afraid to work hard for them. Even if you hadn't been Nancy's boyfriend, I had been speaking well of you to the hiring managers, hoping to see you succeed. I never knew about this. You have your pride, so I kept quiet. However, it seems I was mistaken." "What do you mean?" "Workplace adultery goes against your company's corporate culture. If discovered, it would lead to trust issues with clients. Furthermore, I've been independently investigating your conduct during work hours. Here are the results." Saying this, my father took out several photographs and documents from the bag he was carrying. They all recorded Stanley's misdeeds. I had no idea my father had been taking such actions. "What is this? Hitting younger employees behind their backs, touching female employees inappropriately, it seems you've been doing whatever you please at work. You managed to hide it well, but thanks to one employee who had the courage to come forward about the abuse, all your misdeeds have been exposed like pulling on a thread. This can't be. Your punishment is already being discussed internally. You'll receive official notice soon, but well, you probably won't be able to avoid dismissal." "You're kidding. And earlier, you told my daughter to get out of this house. If anyone should leave, it's you too. Because this apartment building is owned by me." "What?" "When the previous owner wanted to sell this building due to age, I decided to purchase it. Notices were sent to all tenants, but it seems you hadn't looked at them. I'd prefer not to be heavy-handed, but if you're going to mistreat my daughter and occupy this place, I'll have no choice but to issue an eviction order." My father continued revealing shocking facts one after another. Stanley couldn't seem to understand what was happening and was unable to argue back. Harriet clung to Stanley as if seeking help. However, no one could stop my father now that he was truly angry. "How dare you treat my precious daughter and newborn grandchildren so callously? I will never forgive you. Be prepared. Damn it. Stanley, I'm divorcing you. I'll consult with my father and make sure to get both alimony and child support. Harriet, I'll be claiming compensation from you as well, so be prepared." No. With those words, I left the scene, making sure to keep the children from seeing Stanley. As I left, I caught a glimpse of Stanley. He had his hands on the floor, shaking his head, looking frustrated. And so, my divorce from Stanley was finalized. Stanley, having incurred my father's wrath, was fired from his company and evicted from his home, leaving him unable to maintain a proper life. This is something I heard from my father later, but apparently Harriet was only interested in Stanley's income, and when he lost his assets, she abandoned him and disappeared. When I wondered about the alimony that was properly being deposited into my account, I learned that the money had been advanced by Harriet's parents. Enraged by their daughter's actions, Harriet's parents disowned her. Although Harriet was also fired from the company and struggling financially, it was useless for her to seek help from her parents. To ease her difficult financial situation, she's now reportedly working at a nightclub. After the divorce, I ended up staying at my parents' home with the children. Although I considered becoming independent, my parents thoughtfully suggested we continue living together, saying it would be difficult to raise 2 children alone. While watching Daniel and Jackie sleeping peacefully beside me, I thanked my father. "Dad, thank you so much for helping me back then." "It's fine. When you thank me like this, it makes me feel good knowing I was able to protect you." "Is that how it works?" "You'll understand someday." At that time, I still didn't understand the meaning of my father's words. Gratitude rather than apologies. Daniel and Jackie grew up following their kind grandfather's teachings, able to express gratitude without embarrassment. 20 years passed, and my father passed away. Cancer was discovered about 2 years ago, and by then it was already too late. My father lived until the end with his best smile. Throughout the funeral, I kept saying words of gratitude to my father in my heart. Around the same time, Stanley's child support payments stopped. He had promised to pay child support until the children graduated from university, but the payments gradually became irregular and finally stopped completely. It was as if he had been waiting for my father's death. Contact was also lost, and I had no idea where he was or what he was doing. Since my elderly mother needed nursing care, I had no time to search for Stanley and gave up trying to find him. Fortunately, thanks to the substantial inheritance my father left behind, I was able to send Daniel and Jackie to university to pursue their dreams. 10 years after Stanley went missing, Daniel and Jackie were already 30 years old. After my mother passed away and the children had left home, I sold the family house and started living alone. One warm day, my doorbell rang, and when I opened the door, Daniel was standing there. "What's wrong, Daniel? Do you have the day off work?" "Yes, it's my first break in a while. I bought your favorite cake, so let's eat together." "Oh, how unusual. I'm happy, please come in." I invited Daniel in and started preparing coffee. After graduating from university, Daniel had become a full-fledged surgeon at a large general hospital. Ever since learning that my father's cancer was beyond treatment, he had chosen to become a doctor, saying he wanted to help as many people as possible. He hardly has any days off, and I worry about his health, but he says he finds fulfillment in dedicating his life to his patients. I felt proud of such a son. By the way, something interesting happened the other day. As I was trying to decide which cake to eat from the box, Daniel took a sip of coffee and began his story. It was quite shocking. Apparently, my ex-husband Stanley had been admitted to the hospital where Daniel works. When Daniel saw Stanley's name on the medical chart, he checked to confirm if it really was Stanley himself, who had been missing for nearly 10 years. Stanley came into the examination room with a woman about Daniel's age, and was surprised to see Daniel's face and nameplate as he sat in his chair. "Why are you here?" "Well, because I've been assigned as your surgeon." "That can't be true." Until the child support payments stopped, Stanley and the children had met occasionally when the children wanted to. Seeing Daniel's face with the mole under his eye that he'd had since childhood, Stanley must have recognized that the doctor before him was his son. Suddenly, Stanley became frightened and began pleading with a nearby nurse. "Please, transfer me to another hospital. Or at least change my doctor to someone else. Otherwise, I'll be killed." "What's wrong with you?" From the atmosphere, it seemed the woman who came to the examination room with him was Stanley's new wife. Despite being in a hospital, Stanley was shouting loudly and clinging to the woman next to him. "I abandoned him. I neglected him and his mother when he was just born and had an affair. When his scary grandfather died, I ran away without paying child support. He must hate me for that, right?" "Well, if you're asking whether I hate you or not, yes, I do." "I knew it. You're planning to deliberately fail the surgery to get revenge on me, aren't you? Please don't kill me. I'll borrow money if I have to, but I'll pay back all the money I didn't pay." Stanley, who had completely panicked, voluntarily revealed one thing after another without being asked. His new wife, who apparently hadn't known about the past, was initially stunned by Stanley's transformation, but seeming disillusioned, she left Stanley behind and walked out. Stanley was also dragged away by nurses and taken to another room. The commotion was apparently heard outside the examination room, and other patients had gathered, causing a stir. That's not a funny story. After hearing Daniel's story, I put my hand to my forehead in exasperation. I never imagined such a coincidence could happen. I felt sorry for involving Daniel in my ex-husband's foolishness. I was planning to perform the surgery properly regardless of whether I hated him or not. But after such a commotion, I had no choice but to step down as his surgeon. That makes sense. There's more to this story, would you like to hear it? Suddenly interrupting our conversation was my daughter Jackie. Apparently, I had forgotten to lock the front door after Daniel's arrival, and Jackie scolded me for being careless. More to the story? What do you mean? That new wife came to me for divorce consultation. She said she wanted to get a lot of compensation. Jackie had become a lawyer. Since childhood, she had dreamed of becoming a lawyer like her grandfather, and she passed the bar exam while still in university. Now she works at a law firm near my house while studying to establish her own practice. Just recently, Stanley's new wife had come for consultation, of course not knowing anything about Jackie. What an incredible second coincidence. She said she'd been deceived by her husband. When I asked for the husband's name, it was quite unexpected. I had heard about the hospital incident from Daniel, so the dots connected. That must have been unfortunate. Surely by now, that person must have learned his lesson? That person meant Stanley. The fact that they couldn't call him a father showed that neither of them had forgiven the man who abandoned them. Jackie, while transferring the cake Daniel had bought onto plates, answered his question with apparent exasperation. Actually, it seems he hasn't learned at all. Through my work, I've learned that people who commit adultery often repeat it, so I introduced his new wife to a detective I know for a background check. Sure enough, it turned out he was involved with other women too. What a terrible person. I had no choice but to pass this case to a colleague who specializes in divorce cases. Really, he's such a hopeless person. We barely have any memories of him acting like a father to us, so I can't even feel sympathy. I agree. I never felt lonely without a father. We had Mom, and Grandpa and Grandma were so kind to us. Daniel and Jackie said this with a laugh. If my father hadn't dealt with Stanley and his mistress that day, I might have ended up raising the two children in a terrible environment. I'm nothing but grateful to my father and mother who showed so much love to their grandchildren. On the other hand, I always felt that the children's impressive growth wasn't due to my efforts. I sometimes worry whether I did anything for them as a mother. By the way, Jackie. What happened to that? It should be arriving any minute now. Just as Jackie glanced at the wall clock, the doorbell rang again. When I tried to get up from my chair, Daniel stopped me, and Jackie went to the door. Daniel was grinning at me as I wondered what was going on. When Jackie returned to the room, she had a bouquet of bright red carnations in her hands. Daniel and Jackie looked at each other, smiled, and said in twin-like unison that today was a day to thank Mom. A few months later, perhaps because the encounter with Daniel had terrified him so much, Stanley silently deposited all the overdue child support payments into my account at once. He must have borrowed money to prepare it, as he had declared to Daniel. While Stanley's surgery was successful, he was apparently treated like a hot potato in the hospital until the day of his discharge due to his dramatic behavior. Daniel said he'd never had a patient like that before. After being discharged, Stanley experienced even more hellish experiences. His new wife was not only enraged about being lied to by Stanley but also about his relationships with other women, and she demanded substantial compensation. Stanley reportedly borrowed money again and paid this in full as well. When Stanley, now struggling financially, tried to move in with one of the women he had been involved with, that woman disappeared, not wanting to be involved in troublesome matters. After losing everything, all Stanley had left was massive debt. He would surely spend his later years in empty loneliness. But that was the result of his own actions, so it's none of my concern. Several years have passed, and Daniel and Jackie have each met wonderful people and gotten married. Cute grandchildren have been born, and they sometimes come to visit me. I'm spending a happy retirement surrounded by my beloved family, grateful for these days.